I wonder if we could get in a little bit to the sort of philosophy and ideology of no fault too, kind of stepping away from the legal aspects of things, because a lot of this is actually discussed quite detailed in Bolshevik and some Marxist literature, going from The Origins of the Family by Frederick Engels, Nikolai Krylenko, which was a legal social theorist who pushed for unilateral no fault essentially, and then Alexandra Kollontai, who was a Marxist feminist who actually distinguished herself from liberal feminism in a very powerful way, in a lot of literature there. And so there's actually an academic, philosophical underling to all of this that we don't really speak about externally here in the United States, right. And we start to see glimpses of it, but there, it's really manifested in a subtle way here in the States, whereas in Russia we have an actual academic grounding in what it's all about. So could you kind of get into a little bit of the ideology and the philosophical aspects of right. how no fault has come about?
Well, it's the ideological element is very important. It's a major theme in my book. I have a whole chapter on it. A lot of it, as you say, the antecedents were in the French Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution. In both of those revolutions, you had a relatively minor aspect of the revolution was the emergence of organized feminism. What we're getting nowadays, of course, is that organized feminism has had its own day in the sun. It tagged along with the Jacobins, it tagged along with the Bolsheviks. Now it's emerged it's dominating left-wing politics. And yes, as you say, Engels and others pushed this kind of line, but it was never a major part of the Bolshevik or socialist program. But as feminism has come to more and more to dominate the left, it's become more and more important. And as I point out in the book, actually I owe this reference to Judy Perico from her book. She pointed out that the feminists have been all the way through. It's been the feminists who have been pushing no-fault divorce. They were drafting no-fault divorce laws as early as the 1940s. They couldn't get them enacted until the 1960s and 70s, when people's attention was elsewhere and when the cultural climate became more welcoming toward the sexual freedom and the sexual revolution, and that's when they managed to get it through. But they had been pushing for this for years, and even now, if you look around the world, in the United Nations and in the global South, they are pushing no-fault divorce laws in countries like India and elsewhere that receive developmental aid and so forth. It's one of the major aspects of the program because they know that it's something they can get through. It brings the gender war into every household in the land, and they know that they won't get much opposition or blowback from the conservatives or even the Christian groups or even the Muslim groups. So it's a major it's like a war that they can start and the other side doesn't show up. But so the ideological aspect of it, somewhat in socialism, but even more so in feminism, is very, very powerful.
I'm sure you know the case that went through recently in the UK. There's a lot of buzz about no-fault divorce being introduced in the United Kingdom after Owens v. Owens, who was a 67-year-old woman who wanted to divorce her spouse, who I believe was actually a family law attorney, but I'm not sure for certain. And so there's like a lot of conversations now trying to introduce it through the parliament, since the judges, they follow the law. They put limits on themselves and said we couldn't process this, but they are trying to push it through the parliament. There's an interesting gentleman, I forget the name offhand right now, but he actually talks about no-fault divorce kind of in class terms, because when you talk about the feminist kind of push, there's a lot of damage and harm that's being done at the common people level. I mean, when we talked about feminism arising from some of the Marxist literature, but now even more so in the United States, we talk about the sort of economic or property aspects of that being sort of the one aspect or one string between the family, is that there are economic considerations. It's its own economic unit whereby people depend on each other, and so that actually increases the bond of marriage in some respects. And so you have this push by feminists in the United States that are pushing and maintaining no-fault divorce, but it's actually hurting a large portion of even the female population. The more traditional women, or the women that stay at home and raise their children, women who have foregone education for these domestic, by choice, their domestic desires or responsibilities. And so, maybe can you shed light a little bit on the, even from this sort of gender analysis, how even the feminist push for no-fault divorce is damaging a large portion of the female population who, in many respects, go into poverty because of this. And as Jeff was saying, even more so now that feminism is the dominating ideology, that even custody arrangements are being, arbitrarily cut off for women as well.
Yeah, well, that's very true. It's like a number of fashionable trends in our society. Things like divorce, cohabitation, social drinking and recreational drug use. These things start in the middle class, and they're relatively, they don't result in social destruction. They're relatively tolerable. When they spread to populations of less affluent people, less educated people, they cause social disaster. And this is what we see, of course, in the ghettos. In this country especially, where cohabitation has created a huge epidemic of fatherless children. The result of that is substance abuse, crime, a continuation of unwed children born out of wedlock in the next generation and the next generation. And the destruction is huge. So yes, it has taken a huge toll in the destruction of marriage generally and fatherhood have taken a huge toll in the low-income populations. First in the United States, in countries like Britain. Increasingly we see this in countries, the banlieue of Paris and France, Marseille. Very similar in immigrant populations, many immigrant populations from Europe, from Muslim countries. You find the same epidemic of fatherlessness. It's a breeding ground of not only crime and substance abuse, but terrorism. Grows up in these fatherless communities of France and Germany. So it's horribly destructive, we think these things are harmless because affluent people in fashionable neighborhoods in Greenwich Village and Haight-Ashbury can indulge in them, but they're causing huge havoc in terms of social stability and of course in government solvency, because these are the major costs of the welfare state. The welfare state expands exponentially to pay for these things, primarily single-parent homes. Of course, the welfare state contributes to the problem it's supposed to be solving. It breeds more single-parent homes. So it's, we have a crisis not only of social stability, but of government solvency. We simply can't pay for these things anymore. We cannot pay for a welfare system that creates the problem it's supposed to be solving. And that's much of the abuses, by the way, that we see in the divorce system. The domestic violence accusations, the child support abuses, the child abuse accusations, all of these things began under the welfare system. The machinery for these things were first put in place in the welfare system to deal with these problems in single-parent homes, because that's where these problems arise, primarily in low-income, welfare-related communities. What divorce did, middle-class divorce, was it brought these problems into the middle class. It brought out-of-wedlock childbearing into the middle class, and therefore it brought fatherlessness into the middle class. So it brought child abuse, domestic violence accusations, child support payments and enforcement. All of these things were the functionaries who dealt with these, the social workers and others, lawyers, had an enormous amount more work to do and more earnings, therefore, by spreading these things to the middle class. So, this is what used to be a problem of the inner cities. Yep. And the ghettos is now becoming a problem of the mainstream.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of go there a little bit to talk about, not to stereotype, but the African community and the African inner cities have experienced fatherlessness and a lot of, of course, a lot of the inner cities are like you said, subsidized and controlled by the welfare state. And so, I've heard several people on YouTube and whatnot talk about the fatherless homes in the black community, as well as the children basically being raised by the state. And that seems to be essentially what's happening. And like you said, it's been spreading to the middle class and the like. So it seems to be very intertwined and very interconnected with the welfare state as being sort of the society becoming the parent of the home, and in many cases these single parent homes not even having a dominating presence in their children because they have to work and they have to support their homes, and so basically people are raised either on the streets or they're raised by the state, which now manifests through the public schools and through the ideologies that are being spread there. So morality and virtues are not anymore being cultivated through the parents and through the family anymore.
Right. Yeah, no, half a century ago when the Moynihan report came out in the 1960s, we heard about this crisis of fatherless homes in the African American communities in the inner cities. And we thought, we ignored this, we dismissed it, or we made some perfunctory attempts to correct it, and then we kind of gave up. And as a result of this, what used to be said of the African American low-income communities in the city are now true of the later became true of the Native American reservations, the Irish slums, and eventually the white middle class. So these things spread, and the Europeans started it the other way around. Their welfare state started as a middle class entitlement program, basically. It wasn't seen as a form of poor relief as it was in the United States, but the Europeans are having the same exact problem from the top down in some ways. The same problems are spreading to Britain, France, the Nordic countries, Germany, and this has become a crisis throughout the Western world, a crisis of solvency again.